Welcome to BTS Lover. What happens when two global superstars, usually seen on grand stages and in high-end fashion, suddenly appear in the middle of a humble local market? Today, we invite you to step into a moment that left local residents stunned and instantly set social media buzzing. Jimin and Jungkook were spotted casually shopping for affordable clothes, buying in bulk, and unexpectedly the vendors' reactions began to change. Whispers of curiosity quickly filled the air. Who would have thought that such a simple shopping trip could spark an unplanned atmosphere ranging from disbelief and nervous smiles to special treatment no one had anticipated? What really happened when the vendors realized who their customers were? Was this just ordinary shopping? Or is there a warm and surprising story hidden behind the moment? Stay with us, because the story isn't just about budget clothing, it's about humility, genuine human interaction, and small Jikook moments that leave a powerful impression. The morning began like any other ordinary day at the local people's market. Vendors arranged piles of clothes under fading tarps. The sound of bargaining floated through the air, and the rhythm of daily life moved at its familiar pace. No one expected that this simple marketplace, far removed from luxury brands, flashing cameras and red carpets, would suddenly become the setting for a moment that fans would talk about for a long time. It started quietly, too quietly. Two young men walked through the narrow aisles with unhurried steps. They wore casual outfits, caps pulled low, their posture relaxed, almost blending in with the crowd. At first glance, they looked like ordinary shoppers' friends enjoying a rare day off. No loud entourage, no dramatic entrance, just soft laughter, brief glances at racks of clothes, and the unmistakable comfort of two people who knew each other well. But something about them felt different. A few vendors noticed at first. The way people subtly turned their heads, the way conversations paused for half a second too long, the way phones were slowly lifted, not yet certain, not daring to believe. Could it be? As they stopped in front of a small clothing stall filled with affordable shirts and jackets, the truth began to dawn. The smiles, the familiar eyes, the gentle voice that millions around the world could recognize without hearing a single song. It was Jimin, and beside him Jungkook, two global superstars, two members of BTS, standing in the middle of a local market, looking through budget clothing like any other customers. The realization spread like a quiet wave. Not loud, not chaotic, just a growing sense of disbelief that slowly wrapped itself around the market. Jimin picked up a shirt, holding it against himself as if checking the size. Jungkook laughed softly, making a comment that caused Jimin to shake his head, amused. They spoke casually, comfortably, as if the world outside this moment didn't exist. Then came the moment no one expected. They began to bargain, not arrogantly, not dismissively, but naturally, warmly, with smiles. That made the exchange feel less like negotiation and more like friendly conversation. Jungkook gestured toward the pile of clothes they had already chosen, joking about how many they were buying. Jimin added something quietly, his tone polite, almost shy. The vendor froze. For a brief second, time seemed to stop. The vendor's hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from shock. These weren't just customers. These were artists whose faces appeared on billboards, whose music filled stadiums, whose names echoed across continents. And yet here they were, asking for a discount because they were buying in bulk. The vendor laughed nervously, unsure how to respond. Around them, other sellers leaned forward, curiosity burning in their eyes. Some whispered, some covered their mouths, some simply stared, trying to process the surreal scene unfolding in front of them. Would they still bargain? Would they refuse the money? Would they treat them differently now that they knew? What happened next was something no one forgot. Instead of pulling back or acting overwhelmed, the vendor smiled genuinely. The kind of smile that comes from being seen, not intimidated. The kind of smile that said, "They're just people." A discount was given, not exaggerated, not symbolic, just fair, honest, human. Jimin bowed slightly in thanks. Jungkook's eyes widened with playful surprise, his smile bright and unguarded. He thanked the vendor repeatedly, his voice warm, almost boyish. That simple exchange changed the atmosphere of the entire market. Word spread quickly now. Vendors who had been hesitant began to relax. Some waved, some laughed, some pretended not to notice, giving them the space they deserved. There was no screaming crowd, no chaos, just a shared understanding that this moment was special because it was normal. As Jimin and Jungkook continued walking, they stopped at another stall, and then another. Each time, the same pattern repeated. Casual browsing, soft jokes, gentle bargaining, gratitude expressed with sincerity. What struck witnesses the most wasn't the fact that they were shopping in a cheap market. It was how comfortable they were there, how natural, how unbothered by the lack of glamour. One vendor later whispered, "They didn't act like stars at all. They acted like sons, like friends." At one point, Jungkook tried on a jacket that was clearly too big. Jimin burst into laughter, covering his mouth, his eyes crinkling in that familiar way fans adored. Jungkook spun around dramatically, pretending to model it, making nearby vendors laugh despite themselves. Phones came out now, discreetly, not to invade but to remember. To capture proof that this really happened. That Jikook, the idols seen on global stages, once stood here laughing over cheap clothes and small discounts. What made the moment even more powerful was what they didn't do. They didn't demand privacy loudly. They didn't rush through the experience. They didn't use their status to dominate the space. They blended in. When it was time to pay, Jungkook carefully counted the money. Jimin double-checked the bags, making sure nothing was forgotten. They thanked every vendor, sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times. Jimin bowed again. Jungkook waved shyly. One vendor tried to refuse payment. Jimin gently insisted. Jungkook added extra, quietly slipping it forward when the vendor wasn't looking. That gesture, small, unseen by many, became the most talked about detail afterward. Because it wasn't for cameras. It wasn't for headlines. It was for the people standing right in front of them. As they finally left the market, carrying bags filled with simple clothes, the crowd parted naturally. No one chased them. No one screamed. People simply watched, smiling, as they disappeared down the street. Only after they were gone did the market erupt into whispers, laughter, disbelief. Did that really just happen? I bargained with Jungkook. Jimin thanked me. Stories spread online within minutes. Photos surfaced. Short clips. Fan accounts retold the scene with trembling excitement. But what moved fans the most wasn't the proof, it was the story itself. In a world where fame often builds walls, Jimin and Jungkook stepped into a space with no barriers at all. They reminded everyone that humility doesn't disappear with success, that kindness doesn't fade with fame, that sometimes the most unforgettable moments happen far away from stages and spotlights. This wasn't just a shopping trip. It wasn't just a market visit. The story did not end when Jimin and Jungkook disappeared from the narrow street. In many ways, that was when the real impact began to unfold. After they left, the market felt different. Vendors who had watched a moment replayed it again and again in their minds, still half convinced they had imagined it. One seller sat quietly for a moment, staring at the spot where Jungkook had stood, replaying his laughter in her head. Another shook his head in disbelief, repeating Jimin's polite thank you as if it were a treasured souvenir. What surprised everyone most was not their fame, but their awareness. Jimin had noticed small details: how carefully the clothes were folded, how worn the vendors' hands looked, how proud they seemed of their modest stall. Jungkook had listened closely, nodding, asking simple questions about prices and fabric as if he had nowhere else to be. There was no rush, no sense of superiority, just presence. Later that day, short videos began circulating online, blurry, imperfect clips filmed from behind fabric racks or between shoulders, but enough to spark an explosion of reactions. Fans around the world flooded comment sections with disbelief and emotion. Many wrote that this was exactly why they loved Jikook, not because of awards or chart rankings, but because of moments like this, when kindness showed up without being announced. Some fans noticed something else. In one clip, Jimin instinctively stepped slightly closer to Jungkook as people gathered. Not protective in an obvious way, but subtle, familiar, instinctive. In another, Jungkook adjusted one of the shopping bags so Jimin wouldn't have to carry the heavier load. These were not gestures meant to be seen. They were habits, and habits reveal character. By evening, The market vendors had their own stories to tell. One said they would never forget how Jungkook laughed at his own bargaining attempt, embarrassed but amused. Another shared how Jimin bowed so deeply it made them bow back without thinking. Several admitted they hadn't even raised their prices, because in that moment, money felt secondary to respect. And perhaps that is why this story continues to travel so far, because long after the bags were unpacked and the market returned to its routine, one truth lingered clearly in everyone's heart. Fame may change the world around them,